Harvard Business Review put out an article in October of 2011, and it's called The Art and Science of Finding the Right CEO. And it's a summary of what Procter & Gamble does. I'm going to suspect nobody here has a company the size of Procter & Gamble or anything even remotely close. But in 10 or 11 pages of a quick read of concepts, it's probably the best summary I've ever seen. October 11, Harvard Business Review. It's all about what they did to build the foundation for the next generation and allow them to move forward into the future. So these are some important things as you head into the whole concept of transition. Number one, you have to develop a criteria and assess the individual candidates against that criteria. What do you need? Do you need somebody that's a great problem solver? Do you need somebody that's a good maintainer of what's going on? You have to take a look at your internal candidates, excuse me, and you have to be in a position you can identify where for them, remember the fingers? Strengths, gaps. What are their gaps? How do you help them narrow the gap? How do you help them supplement it? One of the things we identified is that once you get over 100 or so people, no one person can necessarily provide all the leadership that's required. You need a team of at least 2. And if I hire somebody or get somebody in leadership that looks just like me, we haven't changed a doggone thing. Somebody got stuck with some jobs they don't like. If I get somebody that's one-off, we've done a much better job, and we're probably going to be able to identify the gaps, fill those gaps, or come to the conclusion we need to go outside the organization to take care of that. You need to start early. Remember that orchard? Well, the responsibility is you got to maintain it, you got to put it in a position that it can sustain itself. The final frontier on transition is you have to start going through and talking to people. We go through and we interview people. And by the way, one of the questions I ask when anybody takes over any department or group, give them about a month, month and a half, and I ask them, who do you think your successor is? I've gotten a whole lot of response. Bill, what am I doing wrong? What should I change? You know, tell me, I'll make whatever changes I have to. And it has nothing to do with them. It's all about thinking about your next step. You're doing this job, maybe you're going to move to this one. Or maybe I need you to be very athletic and to make a complete change to someplace else. When that happens, it's probably going to be because of a bit of an emergency or something we didn't anticipate. I'd like you to have somebody ready to come in behind you and fill the gap that you created. One of the things that we've done, and I would strongly suggest to all of you, is we go through an annual talent review. And what we look at is we try to project to the future and what we anticipate our needs are going to be. Have we got that kind of a person? Do we have somebody in place? And what can we do to get them the experience, the exposures, and the different things they need to touch over time in order to go forward and make the next step? One of the things that's pretty interesting is when you get into that question of you need to identify a couple of successors. Now you can do that if you've got a department of 5. There can be 2 leading candidates. Neither may be perfect, but the role of the leader is to figure out within that group of 5 who is best to take the step forward. What do we need to do to get them that exposure? I've had the unique experience of being the guy that had to move on, and it's not easy. The big challenge is to know how to step out of the role and to know when it's time. And that time is not necessarily about you. It's really about the organization. It's knowing when the organization could use a fresh look. It's all about the organization. It's not about you. If I could repeat that 100 times, I would. When I took over as managing partner, the fellow that I replaced and was my predecessor was a good guy, and he walked in that first day and he said, well, the king is dead. Long live the king. I had to scratch my head for a while to figure out what he was telling me. He had been king. As far as he was concerned, he was dead. New guys there, people are going to listen to everything you said. He felt that no one was going to listen to what he had to say. The reality is he could have a lot of influence, could have had even more had he decided he wanted to have it. It's hard to let go. And any transition won't be perfect. Instead of moving on, really all you're doing is moving over. You're taking the next step to what is your career, and you're trying to figure out a time when it's a helpful step for the organization. You're not stepping out, you're stepping on to the next step for you. So what are the really good practices in succession planning? Starting early is paramount. Soliciting input is pretty helpful. Creating profiles for the position, those people that might fit, identifying their gaps. Identifying the criteria, taking a look both inside and outside the organization for the best solution. Developing a plan, and doing that annual review that I talked about. I stepped down after 8 years as managing partners. The partners asked me to take another term, which would have taken it to 12. And as I looked at it, there were two guys in the organization that I thought were managing partner kind of guys. And if I stepped out, they could both have an opportunity. One was younger. One guy could serve 8. The other fellow could serve the next 8. And in my opinion, it put the firm in a position that it had potential leadership in place for the next 16 years. There were things that I didn't like and I would have changed, but quite frankly, I thought it was better for me to step over. It created 13 changes within the organization, people that took on a new role. And when I did that, what ended up happening is there was this surge of energy and all this new action that took place, a whole bunch of new ideas, things that I thought of, but I don't know if I didn't have the energy, didn't have the creativity, or was pretty satisfied with what I had done. A lot of good things. One of the things that I probably would have done differently, they said, Bill, we want you to stick around. What things were you least satisfied with as managing partner? So I told them, I don't like the way this department, and this department are running. And they said, yeah, we kind of thought you might say that. We'd like you to be in charge of those departments, and why don't you go ahead and fix them? So actually what it did, it was kind of a neat experience because I was able to get back into it, have that opportunity to dig into it, and move forward. There's the book. You've got a copy. Gordon and I collaborated on this. Gordon was my successor. And essentially what it did is we were able to take a look at transition and succession as the guy moving out and the guy moving in. And I hope that we captured a lot of different ideas. And a lot of this presentation really is an outgrowth of the experience he and I shared. If you take a look at what are the impacts, we talked about the 10 steps. If you don't have vision, you put the organization in a bit of confusion. If you're not planning, there's uncertainty about where you're headed. If you're not aligned, tremendous inefficiency. If you don't have somebody promoting change, there's going to be hesitancy, resistance, and kind of doing the same old things the same old way. If you don't create an environment, then you're in a position that folks are going to think anything goes and you end up with a bit of chaos. If communication isn't what it should be, then you create frustration. If you don't have adequate leadership and haven't selected the right people in the organization or aren't willing to go outside, you're really not going to have the right resources to continue it. If you haven't provided learning opportunities, they can't be ready. If you haven't done some mentoring and some coaching along the way, people are going to be dissatisfied and disappointed. Succession and transition and being proactive with it, if you don't have that, people will be ill-equipped to create a sustainable organization. So we started out with the idea that we wanted to create a sustainable organization. And to kind of bring it full circle, let's go back to the beginning. What's important to you? If your vision is to be sustainable, I think these concepts will help you. I don't know that there's anything you haven't heard before, but maybe you heard them in a different light today or they're combined slightly different. It's difficult to say sustainability is right because the right thing might be to have a liquidity event, realize on that liquidity event, retire, move on, try something different, and that might be your goal, and that's perfectly fine. How do you envision your organization? What would you like to have happen? Be honest with yourself and figure out what you want to do. We talked about alignment. If I had one thing that I'd ask all of you to take a hard look at, it's getting your organization at the top aligned. Identify your priorities, where your focus is going to be, how you'd go after things, and in what order. You can't get it all done tomorrow or next week or maybe even this year. It's going to take a few years. When I think about alignment, I don't know if you watch geese, but as I watch geese migrating, I've always been amazed they have that V, and I always wondered about it, so I asked some questions. And what I found out is that when they fly in the V formation, what ends up happening is they flap their wings. Those that are in front create a lift for the ones behind them. It turns out that it's like a 70% acceleration of their ability to continue flying for long distances. That's why when you see one fall out, they generally come back and get right back in line because, quite frankly, it's a lot easier and probably more enjoyable. I always wondered why they're going along and honking. I thought it was just to aggravate me, but I found out that there actually is a reason for it. And that reason is they're cheering the leader on. Keep going. Go as long as you can. Push as hard as you can. Move forward. So the lesson is, I guess if we want to have success and we want to be in a position that we can go forward, having a bit of a sense of a goose is probably a worthwhile thing. You have to articulate and share common direction, a sense of community, get the organization where it can be, and create a level of trust and create a thrust within the organization itself. So I invite all of you to put on your thinking caps, envision the future, create an environment that's worthwhile, support your people, and take a look at the future and great future success. Thanks for being a great attentive audience. Appreciate it.